Okay, so all right, guys. What we were saying earlier is that in the last class we had started working on incorporating the use of databases to our Android mobile apps. Right? We started understanding the very basic concepts that underpins use of databases, right? But embedded databases this time around, right? Not database in the way we already know it. Okay, so remember that there was a time we spent like 3 weeks uh, doing database administration. We learned about SQL, MySQL, and all of that. Okay, so but in this context, it's not an independent um, database server as we know it, where we can have a lot of things going on. This is not the context there. We are actually, what we are making use of here is embedded database. And we said that the provider for this database technology is SQLite, right? So SQLite is a lightweight DBMS that you can embed to your software development environment. Okay, so there are other kinds of lightweight DBMSs. So, but what Android Studio is making use of here is SQLite. There is H2. There's another one known as H2. There's another one known as Derby, Apache Derby, right? I think there's one other popular option out there, but these three I just mentioned are the three most popular: SQLite, H2, and Derby, right? Apache Derby, right? These are the three most popular options. But Android is making use of SQLite, and for reason best known to them, right? And so it's also a very powerful option. So what we want to do in that last class, we told us that there are essential tables, and if you need to rewatch the video for that last class to understand how we arrived at this onCreate method, we told us how important this onCreate method is. This is where whatever happens, like when you're initializing the database, right? For the first time. So the first time this class will be invoked, this DB handler class will be invoked. So whatever is inside here will be run. Or another time it could also be run is maybe when you're upgrading the DB. But in our own case, right, we don't have any instructions for upgrading the DB, so the upgrade will not run. So the only time this guy will run is the first time you're setting up the database, or the first time the user will be using this app and make use of anything that relates to or that references this DB handler class. Okay, so having mentioned that, we want to replicate the same structure that we have created for our visits table. Want to replicate this structure for our user table, right? The reason we want to um, do this is so that we can lay emphasis on the things we've already learned. So you see how we can create another table structure so that if you did not understand what we did in the last class, by virtue of the fact that we repeated these concepts again, maybe it will sink this time around. Okay, so but remember that everything we've done so far are things that, at least if you refer back to our DB administration course that we ran for 3 weeks, okay, you should be able to relate with some of the things we are doing here. Okay, so we are going to create our user table, and so I just want to do a little lazy thing, right, by just copying that table and pasting it, right, and then just make adjustments. So I'll call this users, and I'll allow the ID to remain. Yeah, staff ID is very important for users. And then the next thing we are going to have would be password. Okay. And then we are going to have uh, sign up time. All right. So that is our user table. Very simple, right? So remember the moment you just type create table users, and then you open a pair of parentheses. You right? You type a pair of parentheses. Okay. So in between that parenthesis is where you're going to specify the parameters for the new table, right? And when I say parameters, I'm talking about the columns and the data type, the columns and the data type, and some other things you need to define. Okay, so here we are saying that we need ID column, staff ID column, password column, and then sign up time column, right? And we are notice that we're also specifying the data types for all of these columns. These things are very, very essential. Okay, so now that we have done that, the next thing you must do, without which what you've done here is just useless. Okay, so the next thing you must do is to ensure that you have a command that would uh, activate this, because if you look at this variable users table is currently grayed out because it is not referenced in any context at all. So but we are going to invoke that, make use of that variable here, and so type in users, and so you see that it's no longer grayed out, and the color coding for these things are now in effect because we have made reference to this variable, or we are now consuming the contents of this variable, right? So that is how you create a table, okay? Or that's how you specify or define a table which your app will create for you when it is running this for the first time. Now, when we've done that, the next thing we need to do is to be able to uh, log the user data. So, and remember, you cannot say you want to fetch anything from a database if you have not added something to the database. So when you create a database, the first thing you must do is to create a code snippet or a piece of code that will enable you add stuff to that database. And so we said, explained in that last class, that there are two key things we are going to need. So, but before we talked about those, we talk about those two things. Let me mention, or let me redefine this method signature. So I'll call this password. I'll say I'll change the method name to log new user. Okay. Now that we've called that log new user, okay, so we have staff ID, password. So we are no longer logging um, staff ID, house number, and name, because that is what we log when we are logging visits. But this time around, we are just logging staff ID and password. And so remember we said in that last class that we need two classes. Two classes are very essential if we are going to be able to add things to the database. And the first class there is the SQLite database class. But with that database class, you can create an instance of your database which you have defined in your own create method. You can get a copy or an instance of your database which you have defined in your own create method. And so when we say this get writable database, it means give us access to the database we've defined and give us an object or a representation of that database that will enable us to write to the database. So if you wanted to read from the database, you would do this get readable database, as we are going to see when we go into fetching user, right? But remember that what we want to do now is to log new user. So you need this SQLite database one, and then after specifying it, you can now invoke or create an instance of this database and then save it inside this SQLite database that you've created. And then the next class you're going to need will be the content values. Now, content values is what will help you submit the information or the data you want to hold in your DB. It will help you package it. Now, imagine you want to have, let's say, water, okay? And so, because you want to consume water maybe later in the day, let's say 2 p.m. But you know, when you're going to need to consume that water, you may not find a place to purchase the water, or you may not find a place to get water or fetch water. What you would do essentially ahead of time is that you might get something like a container, fetch that water, hold it so that you can consume it later. And so that is what things like this do. Like this is a collection, like a collection or a variable that helps you to hold stuff. But this time around, it packages it in a special way. It's not just there as a container to help you hold stuff. It packages it in such a way that this database constructs will understand how to commit this information to the database. And so what we are doing essentially here is that we have brought in this guy to help us get an instance of the database, and then we bring in content values to help us package what we want to add to the database, and then we go ahead and add it. In fact, the important thing here is just line 58. In fact, I can actually combine this entire, like all these lines of code here, can combine these 6 lines of code here into one line of code. If you know what you're doing, right? If you know how to chain instructions, if you know how to chain statements in programming, you would agree with me that I can chain this into just one line of code instead of having 6 lines of code. I can chain this into one line of code. But right, that's not what we want to achieve here, right? So if you understand what I've explained to you, that you need just these 2 classes, then you understand it's possible to chain these things efficiently. Okay, so always bear in mind you will need content values and SQLite database when you're adding information, right? And the information we're adding here will be staff ID, right? We are calling it staff ID because it was called, we defined it as staff ID here, right? And the same thing with the password. Sorry, I was referring to this guy. Staff ID, house number, and NIN. Then that's exactly how we defined it here. And so you must use the exact terms. So now these things are what we want to commit or what we want to add to the database in the place or in the stead of this staff ID. So remember that this staff ID is what we fetched from an external source, because this log visits will be invoked from outside here, from outside this DB handler class, so that we can log visits. But our attention, I want us to focus more on the user context so that we can use that to demonstrate authentication this evening, right? So in logging user, what we are going to do is just staff ID and password. And then we bring in this DB, right? Get an instance of the database, right? And then use these content values to package what we want to send. Then here, on using the db.insert, remember it's this DB again, right? So the only reason we brought in this DB is because we wanted to use it to insert stuff to our DB. That's why we made use of this SQLite database class. Okay, so this time around, we are not logging data, we are not committing data to the VCS level. We're actually doing it on the users level, right? And this is the values we are submitting, and that's all. As you can see, it's very, very simple if you understand what you're doing. Okay, so at the same time, I would want us to also create something that will help us, you know. So let me copy this guy and do the same thing for fetching user. Or this time around, we are not fetching user, we are going to be authenticating user, right? Because for now, we don't need to fetch user, we just want to authenticate the user. So here, our return type will be Boolean, because we want to check with the database whether this user exists or not, and whether if he exists, are the credentials correct, the password and the user ID submitted, are they correct? So that is our target here. So it's a simple case of true and false, and nothing very complex about it. If the credentials that the user submits, if they are valid, return true. If they are not valid, return false. And so let us modify this code here to represent what we are dealing with. And so this would be authenticate user, right? And what we are going to submit will not just be staff ID. We are going to submit the password as well. So say string staff ID string password. Precious, are you guys still following me?
Yes, sir.
Right. So now the query here will be select all from users where staff ID is this and password is this. Okay, so we are going to submit uh, selection arguments, right? And these arguments are the things that will fill up this place and this place. So how do we do that? We are going to create a new string array and then submit those parameters, staff ID, comma, password. Now, what this guy will do is when it starts running this query, it will take staff ID and replace it here, then take password and replace it here. Now, this is known as parameterized queries. Parameterized queries. Now, they are used, it has security connotations. Okay, so we are not going to start. We will not dabble into the nitty gritties of parameterized queries, but just know that that's what it's called, and it's a safer way to write your database queries. A safer way to write it. Okay, now. So now that we have done all of this, you notice that this guy is not happy because he's saying you want to return boolean, then why are you asking us to return a new visit? Okay, so what we are going to do is remove all of this. Now we should bear in mind that cursor.move to next, what it checks is, does this cursor, because what cursor helps us do, right? If you remember from the last class, what cursor helps us do is to run our raw query and get results. So, right, and the results will be held inside cursor. So whenever we say cursor.move to next, we are simply asking cursor, do you have any results inside of you? Now, assuming there was any user that was fetched successfully, then this cursor.move to next will return true. But if no user was fetched from as a result of this query, then this move to next will return false. So instead of writing long lines of code trying to return boolean or this or that, all we need to simply do is to please return whatever value that comes out of this cursor or move to next. Because if there's a result, it will return true. So I'm simply saying return whatever comes out from here. That's what I'm saying. And I know it will either return true or false. It will return false if there are no users that match this criteria. It will return true if there is a user that matches this criteria. And I'm saying, please don't just tell me about it. Return it to whoever is calling this authenticate user, so that the person can know, yes, this user exists and the credentials are correct. So now that we have done this, we are going to go back to our, in fact, I think we did not do a sign up screen, right? We did not design a sign up screen. Precious, did we design a sign up screen in this class?
No, it's just the that log visit and dashboard.
Okay, we just have a login screen, but let's see whether we can quickly put up a sign up screen. Okay, something very casual, or we might just replicate. Okay, let's duplicate this guy. So I'll copy this and paste it back here. So it will ask me, do you still want to retain the same name? I'll say no. So I'll call this sign up screen. Okay, so now that I have this sign up screen, what I would like to do, I'll remove this thing. Okay, I'll also remove this guy. Okay, so that people can just come in, type their ID, type their password, and then click on login. Sorry, and click on sign up. So this is what our sign up screen will look like. Okay, so let me change this button to sign up. So what will happen? What will happen is that whenever a user clicks on this sign up, it would commit this information to that database that we just created. Okay. So let us go ahead and create. Okay, so let us go ahead and create the activity counterparts for this layout screen we just created. So we'll come into, we can right click anywhere essentially, and then say new activity. I would say don't generate a layout file because I already have a layout file, and I'll call this my sign up. So that inside here, I can now say set content view r dot layout dot sign up screen. So having done that, we are ready to work on this sign up. Okay, so let's go ahead and uh, create programmable references to these controls we have here. This text field, this edit text, and then this button. Okay, so I'll have edit text for user ID and edit text for password. Okay, so now that we have done that, we'll also do the same thing for button. Okay, so having done that, we can go ahead and initialize them to say then we map, we want to initialize them by mapping them to those elements we have in the design view. Okay, so now that we have initialized all the controls, right, the programmable references and the variables, now that we've initialized all of them, the next thing we must do is to add some intelligence to that button. Now, because the button there is the center of attraction, right? The button is the center of attraction. And with the button, we can now begin to implement other stuff. So this is sign up button. Then I'll attach a listener to this button. Now, the reason I'm attaching a listener to it is so that it will listen for when a user will tap on the button or click on the button, right? So if I don't attach a listener, I will not know when the user clicks on the button. So I'll say set on click listener. And we can define that listener separately or just go ahead and implement it inside here. And I can do that by saying new on click listener. Okay. Now that I've done that, all I did was just type new inside that parenthesis and do control space bar. Then this guy will come up. Okay. Now, but you can implement this listener outside of here and then just make reference to it inside this place. Okay. So inside here, what do I want to happen when the button is clicked? So this is what I want to happen. I want to fetch the text that the user had typed inside that text field. So I'll say user ID edit text user ID dot get the text that the user typed, then convert it to string. Then string password, and the password we are extracting it from the password field. We'll get the text on it, then also convert to string. So once we've done that, we've extracted the user ID and password. The next thing we need to do now is to commit it to the database, right? So remember that when we want to commit to the database, all we need to do is to call the DB handler and look for and invoke the, where's that guy? Log new user, and invoke the log new user. And we invoke the log new user, and we are going to pass in the staff ID and the password at the same time so that I can save it to the password for us, sorry, to the database for us. So what we are going to do is to first make our DB handler accessible to sign up. So how do we do that? We also come in here. Okay, since for now, let's use it as a local fact. Let's keep it as global. So DB handler DB. Okay, so I can now come in here and say DB is called to new DB handler. Then I'll say this. Now, what is this that I'm passing? This is the this here is a context, is a representation of the context of this current activity. So remember that in the DB handler, before you invoke the DB handler, you must submit a context to it as defined in this constructor, right? Not that you must submit a context. The context can could be null, right? But you have to submit something because the constructor specifies that you must submit a context, even if the context does not carry something inside it, even if the context is null, but you must submit a context. And so that is why we are doing this. Okay, so the context for this screen can be represented as this. And so we are submitting it to the constructor of the DB handler so that it can create an instance of that DB inside here, right? So now with this DB, we know that we are referring to everything that we implemented earlier here. Okay, so we can now come down here and say db dot log new user, and then we supply that user ID to it and also the password. Guys, I hope we're following.
Yes, sir.
All right. So now that we have submitted, so our expectation here is that the app will run off, right, and then log this information to the DB. So when we are authenticating users in our login screen, so instead of doing the hard-coded stuff we're doing earlier, right? Remember that we also need to call our create a DB handler variable here. Then also we can come down here and instantiate it using a constructor. We'll pass the context. Okay, so that down here, instead of doing what we did earlier, we'll simply say so this is ID and this is password. What we are going to do, instead of doing this kind of authentication we did earlier, but let me cut this out, okay, and keep it here so that we can always refer to it later. Okay, so instead of doing that, we can simply say db dot authenticate user, and we'll now pass in the ID and the password. And if that is correct, we'll be allowed to log in. If it's not correct, we will not be allowed to log in. So let's see whether we can run this. Okay, I will try to put on my emulator now, right? If this works, fine. If it doesn't work, fine. Okay, so let's see whether this will work.
Sir, we are not hearing you.
I wasn't talking. I'm waiting for the emulator to load.
Okay.
Okay, so as soon as our emulator loads, we are going to test this app and see what it looks like. Okay. The essence of using this authentication to test in-app DB is to for us to see how adding information to a database and retrieving information, how they work and how fast it can be. But ideally, when you're designing an authentication system, you would not design it this way. This is not the approach you would use, right? So ideally, you will be authenticating um, this information via a network call or an API call, right? It will not happen on the app, right? If there are cases where you need to do on the app, there are scenarios, but we are going to discuss these use cases as we progress. But the important thing for us now is to understand how these things work, how we can use them. So it's after we understand how we can use them, then we can bring out a proper case study, and then we sit down and dissect and know, okay, how do we apply this? How do we bring in-app memory here? Do we use shared references here? Do we do an API call? Do we fetch information from an external database? Okay, so these are some of the things we are going to consider by the time we understand the rudiments. For now, our target is to get a grasp of the rudiments. So the moment we lay hold on the rudiments, we can then progress to other very serious issues. Guys, I hope you can see the emulator screen.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'll be running the app on it. So let's see whether our authentication will work. Okay, so let's click on login and see. Oh, we cannot even access the sign up screen. So let's do something here that will take us to that screen. I hope you guys are still following.
Yes, sir, but we're using the emulator only.
What did you say, Precious?
It's just the emulator that we are seeing.
Huh?
Just the emulator that we are seeing. We are not seeing the code.
Oh, sorry. I was working on something as I'm trying to. So I'm trying to get. I added a text view. I added this text view. This guy at the bottom here, right? I added it so that I can. Let me arrange it well. Margin top would be, let's say, 25 dp, and then margin top will be 25 dp, and then let me send it to the center. So layout gravity will be center. All right, so let me make the text style bold so that we can notice it quickly. Okay, so now that we have done that, so in the login, in the activity, I'll create a programmable reference to that as well. Okay, remember I'm using a text view there. I'm using a text view, but I made this text view clickable. If you notice this last parameter I used here, I made it clickable. Making it clickable will make it function as though it is a button. Okay, so I'll come in here and say text view go to button, right? I'm going to come in here and say that go to button is map it to go to button in the layouts, and then also add a listener to it. And so when this listener is there, all I want you to do is start activity. Right, so once I click on it, it will take me to the sign up class. So let's rerun this app and see how that works. Okay, so installation is complete now. So you can see the sign up guy is here. So if we click on it, it should take us to the sign up class. So we are now on the sign up screen. So we can now sign up. So let's say my user ID might be, let's say, Zach, and my password will be 12345. And then I'll click on sign up. So I want to believe that this sign up was done successfully. Another mistake we made is we didn't add something that will, okay, so but let me use the back button, right? Let me use the back button this time and go back to the login screen. Okay, so why is our back button not working? Okay, it's finally working. So what we want to do now, remember we use Zach and 12345. Guys, I hope you saw that.
Yes, sir.
So this time around, I'm going to use this SP444, SP4555, and then the same 12345 as password, and let's see whether it will authenticate us. So click on login. So it's telling us try again later. Now, because that's not what it is expecting. So let's change this staff ID and provide Zach. And let's see whether it will log us in. Can you guys see that?
Yes, sir.
So which means that sign up we did was correct without errors, and the authentication is also now working. So you see how you can, because as it stands now, it means that what we did earlier is working efficiently. So that this log new user is actually working correctly, and also that this authenticate user is also working correctly. So notice that we used the wrong credentials and it told us to try again. We used the right credentials and it granted us access. And if you look at the login, it's different from what we did the last time. We are no longer hard coding the credentials. We are fetching it this time from the database, which is a powerful upgrade from where we came from. Okay, so again, I'll pause the class here.
Hello,
Those
sir.
that came,
Yes,
I'm coming, I'm
sir.
coming, I'm coming. Hold on. Those that were here in the last class did not come to today's class, right? Except Victor, right? So I wouldn't want us to make go too far before they're able to play catch up with us, right? I know my travel is what confused them, right? They felt maybe to be like the last time I traveled and the class did not hold again. So I understand, right? So, but we are going to leave it off here so that when they come back to join us, they would not, they wouldn't have missed so much. Okay, they wouldn't have missed so much. Yeah, Victor, you wanted to ask a question.
Yes, sir. The passwords that we use, has it been created before? Because normally when you want to log, you have if you are logging into an app or a site, they will ask you for you must have created your password and your ID. So this one we just use you don't use that, or you created the app before now.
Were you not there when we did sign up on the app? Eh? You were there now when we did sign up on this app. Didn't you see when we did sign up here?
And I sorry, sir.
Now that was when we signed up now. That's what sign up does.
Okay,
Sign up is registration. We signed up
okay,
and we held the information in a database. And that was the information we held in the database is what we now tried authenticating.
yes.
All right.
There's this thing you give to all that we should use. Just want to share our screen with you.
I told you it's any desk software, any desk.
Okay, okay, Okay,
And
just to
download and install
download it.
AnyDesk to your system. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So, guys, thank you for joining us today. Um, we are going to meet again. Precious, when is our next class? That will be Tuesday, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So we're going to see again on Tuesday to continue building on what we have learned. So I believe we will take time and rewatch all we have missed, right? So that we are grounded on these concepts before that next class.